Welcome to the martech.org podcast.
Welcome to the conversation. I'm Mike Pastore, editorial director at Martech. It's possible the third-party cookie in Google Chrome saga is almost over. As of right now, Google has yet to allow consumers to opt out of third-party cookies, which we think would be about the end of what has been a very long story with a number of twists and turns. But throughout this journey, there have always been voices saying that there are better ways to measure and target ads without third-party cookies. And, as we all know, the other players in the browser market cast aside cookies long ago. Joining me to discuss where we all go from here is Konrad Feldman, CEO and co-founder of Quantcast. Welcome, Konrad.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here with you.
All right, so as somebody who's heavily invested in the online advertising industry, let me start by asking you this. Did anything, and in particular the end of Google's third-party cookie saga, surprise you?
Gosh, I think perhaps the most unsurprising thing is that the saga continues. I think we've been used to the extension of the saga now for a few years. I think it was originally deprecation was going to take place in 22, and then it was 23, and then it was 24. I think based on history, probably not that surprising. I think we're still left with a lot of open questions. The whole industry is. Again, I don't think we should necessarily be surprised by that because it's been a little like that along this journey all the way.
Yeah, as you were saying, marketers have been put through the ringer on this one. Beyond working with Quantcast, what's your advice for marketers and advertisers about the path forward?
Keep going. I would say that really, practically, not that much has changed. The reality is that a large portion of internet users are using devices and software already that doesn't support third-party cookies. Many people that use the Chrome browser, they weren't waiting for Google to deprecate cookies. They've chosen to not enable third-party cookies either within the browser or for the use of ad blockers or VPNs. And so if you're a marketer today, already half or more of the audience that you want to reach cannot be addressed and perhaps even more importantly, measured using third-party cookies. So you need to be using alternative approaches. Otherwise, you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage. I think we have to see how this plays out in terms of where Google actually ends up. What is the choice mechanism they offer to consumers? How do they offer that? Do they sort of treat themselves preferentially or not? There's a bunch of open questions there that will have sort of knock-on effects in terms of the solutions that people need to use. I think it's been clear for a long time that if you're dependent solely on third-party cookies, you're at a significant and increasing disadvantage.
Yeah. And in the background of all this, you have Google and their Justice Department antitrust issues that sort of plays into the thinking, I would think, of some of the things that you just mentioned. Like, do they give themselves preferential treatment? That's gotten them in some trouble in the past.
Certainly the current case, well, there's obviously a case that's just completed relating to search, where the judge found that Google is a monopoly and acted as a monopoly to protect it. And so we'll see where that goes. It's a big judgment. Obviously, there'll be appeals and it'll work its way through. Of course, there's another case due to start this month that sort of relates. It's sort of in the weeds of how the programmatic ecosystem works. And there's certainly a number of allegations brought forth in that case that sort of talk about self-preferencing. And this is another area. Again, and of course, all of these things interrelate because, of course, Google operates lots of different products and services across the digital advertising ecosystem. And of course, the majority of their revenue also comes from advertising. So I'm sure there'll continue to be scrutiny on the cookie issue, as there has been, led by the UK's Competitions and Markets Authority.
Yeah. Right now, I think most people who I've heard voice an opinion on this think that consumers will opt out of third-party cookies. As you said, it might depend on how exactly that choice is offered to them. Is that what you're expecting to happen?
I think a lot is going to depend upon the nature of how these choices are presented and what the options are. There isn't clarity on that today. So, for example, we have different laws in for example in Europe compared to the US in terms of consent and the types of information that can be captured and how it's used and what consumers' rights are. So it's possible that we end up with different choices as a result of that. We could end up with an opt-in mechanism in Europe and an opt-out, for example, in the US. But all of that is unclear. I think everyone would like to have more clarity on it, and everyone will probably continue to have to sort of spin their wheels and expend more resource than might be necessary in continuing to plan for a number of different outcomes in the absence of clarity.
So perhaps one day we wake up, we fire up our Chrome browser, and we get, depending on where you are, as you said, you opting in, you opting out. What do you want to do with third-party cookies? When that day comes, is that the end of the story?
Oh, I don't think so. I think the story will run for a while. Look, the nature of how those questions get asked will be interesting. There's a model, obviously, that Apple adopted with their ATT, the app tracking and transparency work in like iOS. I think it was 14.5 in 21, and they ask questions very differently for their own use of information and measurement they did of others. And that had a big impact on the ecosystem. It was hugely beneficial for Apple. I think there's increased scrutiny generally of the power that some of these tech giants exert on not just the technology ecosystem, on the world and society. I'm not sure they would be able to do the same thing today, and that's something that may even get looked at in the future. So I think things will depend on that. But ultimately, cookies have been going away for a long time. Cookies are really widely used, but they're sort of ubiquitous because they're part of the protocol that manages the web, HTTP. And because of their ubiquity, they got used for lots of things. They aren't necessarily the best solution for lots of things, but the sort of the ease of access and the fact they were always there meant people would rely on them. And I would say in many cases, over-relied on them. There's a lot of money that is wasted, a lot of irrelevant advertising because people are sort of measuring what was simple to measure rather than really thinking about what was valuable to measure. And I think cookies have been part of the solution. They've also been part of the problem.
Yeah, it's a text file. It's one of the simplest, smallest things you can do on the internet.
That's right. That's right.
So, given all that, if you look more broadly at digital marketing and advertising, what do you think we're going to be talking about in 2025? What do you think is going to be interesting? What are you excited to be talking about?
Well, look, I still think we're going to be speaking a lot about cookies and cookie deprecation then. I think this will take a while to play out, but I think there's so many other interesting and exciting things to talk about. Obviously, a trend that's affecting every industry is artificial intelligence, and I think specifically there the recent excitement and progress has been around these large language models. They are just one aspect of artificial intelligence. Whilst they've become very popular over the last couple of years, at Quantcast we've been using artificial intelligence since our inception. From Quantcast Measure onwards, we make extensive use of different types of AI. Large language models are brilliant at dealing with problems that can be understood and expressed using language, as the name implies. There are lots of problems in advertising that, for example, making predictions about audiences or determining the value of advertising opportunities or automating advertising optimization that actually large language models aren't particularly well suited to. There's other forms of machine learning that are better suited to it. But I do think we'll see advances in the use of some of these newer models for helping manage creative and making that process both easier and easier to produce, lower cost, but also more personalized. And I think that's exciting. I think that the promise of data-driven advertising is only really fully realized when it encompasses creative as well. That will be exciting. And I also think the thing that I'm excited about and the work we're doing at Quantcast is bringing the power of these technologies that are available to marketers. Millions of marketers use them today when they're purchasing advertising within a walled garden. if they're on Facebook or they're on Google, they're using these forms of sort of automated artificial intelligence to make themselves more productive, but also make the advertising easier in terms of achieving results. But because of the constraints that they're operating just in those walled gardens, it's gotten really expensive. Most marketers would say their customer acquisition costs have just kept going up, and a lot of that value is sort of staying inside the walled gardens. I think the opportunity for marketers to take advantage of the same sorts of powerful artificial intelligence to find audiences and automate advertising performance across the entirety of the open internet offers them, new chances for scale at much more effective levels of sort of CAC.
Yeah, programmatic has always offered the scale. The walled gardens have offered the targeting. And, one of the things about walled gardens is if you're trying to scale, you got to stop at every walled garden and go and build your campaign. And
absolutely you do. And I think that's always where people will start. One of the challenges has been, if you look at the history of programmatic outside the walled gardens, it's been using tools that required the operator, the marketer, the trader, whoever the person was using the software, to actually specify every rule about the targeting, about how the campaign is conducted. And at Quantcast, we take a fundamentally different approach. We use AI to automate those decisions, freeing marketers up. It's what the walled gardens do. We brought that sort of powerful technology to the open internet, and that means that it's practical to test it out and to find the right balance. It's not going to replace everything that you're doing in search and social, but you may find a mix where actually you can deploy, for example, a third of your budget on the open internet and bring down your overall customer acquisition cost, or achieve a higher level of customer acquisition and absolute return for a given budget, or allow your budgets to stretch further, because you can now get more scale at a threshold customer acquisition cost, which is profitable to you.
Right. It's never one thing or the other. It's always
right.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Exactly. Right. And we've really tried to make it easy to test it out. And anyone can come to Quantcast. They can sign up to use our powerful high performance DSP with no minimums and no commitments.
All right. Konrad, thanks for talking about third-party cookies and online advertising with us.
Great speaking with you, Mike.
Thank you for listening to the martech.org podcast. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at martech.org/newsletters.